Now let's talk Medicare for All. In my opinion, this is absolutely the number one issue that I'm voting on this year and forevermore until we have it, because it's so it affects everybody. It affects everybody in our country, from those who are middle class to those who are poor. I mean, the wealthy don't really seem to care about Medicare for All because they're able to afford their medical payments, their insurance, everything like that. But wealthy people with hearts, of course, care about those who don't have the kind of money that they have. But I digress. I think Medicare for All, and that includes medications. I just went to refill some prescriptions because, to be very clear with you, I have depression and anxiety. So I just went to fill all my depression and anxiety medications. And with my great insurance, I have really good insurance. I had to pay $90 for the month for my medications. I know many other people have to pay hundreds of dollars more, even thousands of dollars more than I just had to pay. But I was shocked because I used to have a copay of $5 a prescription, and then it went up to $10 a prescription. And now I have a couple that are $30 a prescription. And so while I had that shock, I just come from the doctor, and my copay at the doctor was $20, and that is nothing compared to what a lot of people have to pay. In fact, a lot of people have to avoid going to the doctor because they don't have health care. They don't have insurance. Jordan, not to blow up his spot, as he would say, but he just had to get off of his COBRA insurance. And so he was looking around at all the options that are available to him, and there aren't many. He's going to have to end up paying a hell of a lot of money to have not very good insurance at all. So, going forward. And the COBRA was expensive as well. It's all so expensive. Ty is also dealing with healthcare issues. It's a lot of money. People end up paying a lot of money for very little. And then they have high deductibles and copays and things like that. And then there are people who have to go without completely. Healthcare, I believe, is a human right. Or as Bernie Sanders would say, a human right. So that's what I'm going to talk about is Bernie Sanders, and he recently unveiled a new version of his plan, and he recently wrote an opinion in BuzzFeed about this. So I think it's an important topic to cover, and it is one of, if not the most important issue for the 2020 campaign. And I honestly believe that because of the way Bernie ran in 2016, Medicare for All is now commonly accepted among Democrats, and it's even commonly accepted among Republicans. And it is because of Bernie Sanders. Before then, no, not even Democrats were supporting. Not even Democrats were signing on to his Medicare for All bill. Now it's become more mainstream, and that gives me hope that it could become something that is accessible and available for all Americans. That just like every other developed country, healthcare is a human right and everyone is covered, and that's the dream. It's going to save so many lives, and not to be a fangirl, but it's because of Bernie Sanders. You can see my Bernie bear behind me. And make no bones about the fact that I am a Bernie girl because of his policies. It's all about the policies. So let's read Bernie Sanders' opinion. There's actually something kind of funny in here that makes me giggle. Bernie wrote this in BuzzFeed, and it cracks me up that it says Bernie Sanders, BuzzFeed contributor. So let's read this piece from BuzzFeed contributor Bernie Sanders. The title, Opinion, Bernie Sanders, Medicare for All's moment is here. Don't back down. Those who make billions from our broken healthcare system will spend enormous amounts trying to divide us, but we cannot rest, and we cannot back down. And this is in Bernie's voice. A decade ago, when I introduced legislation guaranteeing medical care to every American, the proposal was cast as a radical and unrealistic measure, and I could not convince a single senator to co-sponsor the bill. 10 years later, our Medicare for All bill has widespread support in the House and Senate, and polls show Medicare for All is supported by a majority of Americans, including a majority of Republicans. As the House this week held historic hearings about Medicare for All, we must remember that this transformation did not happen by accident. It happened because Americans from all walks of life understand that we have a dysfunctional healthcare system designed to make huge profits for the drug companies and the insurance companies, while tens of millions remain uninsured or underinsured, and we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And these Americans are now fighting back. They are not only resisting Trump's efforts to throw 32 million people off the health care they have, they are demanding that health care in the United States be considered a right, not a privilege. Now, because of these grassroots efforts, we are on the verge of a historic victory, and that reality is prompting a backlash from the powerful special interests that continue to reap hundreds of billions of dollars from the status quo. But our message must be clear. We must remember the lessons of history and refuse to back down. This is not going to be an easy fight. To try to stop our movement's momentum for Medicare for All, the insurance and pharmaceutical industries have recently formed a front group called the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future. In reality, this is a partnership to protect healthy industry profits. Through deceptive ads, the group's goal is to try to persuade legislators to oppose Medicare for All or divide and confuse us with weaker proposals. This group's members aren't patients or consumers or people impacted by our current healthcare system. They are insurance companies and the pharmaceutical industry's lobbying group. These groups spent $143 million on lobbying in 2018 to try to preserve a system that is a disaster for millions of Americans, but that is making big money for CEOs. In 2017 alone, while Americans were getting crushed by higher premiums and prescription drug prices, the top 65 healthcare CEOs made $1.7 billion in compensation, and the 25 highest paid CEOs in the pharmaceutical industry made roughly $440 million. So it should be no surprise that these companies and their political groups will spend enormous sums of money to try to stop us. But let us be absolutely clear. These frantic attempts to derail our progress are a sign that we are winning, and that means we cannot rest, we cannot back down, and we cannot accept any substitute. We must stand firm in unequivocally declaring that through a Medicare for All system, we are going to make healthcare a human right for all people in this country. By the way, it's very difficult to not read that in a Bernie voice, a human right. Our bill expands Medicare to cover all people and to cover long-term care. It will reduce overall healthcare spending and finally end the situation whereby Americans are forced to choose between putting food on the table and paying for medicine. Let's go ahead and I will play this clip straight from Bernie so you can hear it from the man himself.
Here's a radical idea. The function of healthcare should be to provide quality care to every man, woman, and child as a right, not to make tens of billions in profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. We have come a long way in the last 4 years in getting the American people on board the principle that the United States of America should not be the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people as a right. That, to my mind, is an embarrassment, and that is an embarrassment we are going to end. So let us stand up, let's have the guts to take on the drug companies and the insurance companies, and let us finally do what should have been done decades ago and make certain that healthcare is a human right, not just a privilege. Thank you all.
And here is some good news to remember as we begin the 2020 presidential election campaign. If we keep pushing, history suggests that we will be victorious. Recall that in the mid-20th century, President Harry Truman first proposed guaranteeing health care to seniors. This idea was billed as radical, un-American, and an attack on basic freedom that would be a political loser. And because of that withering assault, the idea stalled in Congress for years until voters made their voices heard. In 1960, America elected John F. Kennedy after he campaigned in support of Truman's idea. By the way, JFK is my absolute favorite. I am completely obsessed. That election prompted a healthcare bill to finally begin being debated in Congress, and Kennedy at the time noted that what we are now talking about doing, most of the countries of Europe did years ago. Of course, the legislation was initially blocked by Republicans and conservative Democrats, who argued that if the proposal passed, it would be nothing short of the end of the Republic. Americans, though, were not deterred. They fought back with 1964 election landslide that was so enormous the new Congress was all but forced to immediately pass what is now known as Medicare. It took a big election with voters changing the balance of power on Capitol Hill, as Princeton historian Julian Zelizer wrote. More than half a century after that achievement, we are now at a similar moment in American history. This is a moment that requires us to say louder and more clearly than ever that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. This is a moment to point out that Medicare is the country's most popular and cost-effective healthcare program, and that by expanding it to cover everyone, we will save Americans money. This is a moment to say that we cannot accept any more Americans dying or going bankrupt for lack of medical care. This is a moment to proudly declare that Medicare for All's time has come. In short, this is a moment to stand up, not stand down. If we do that, we will win. And that is something that I absolutely believe. If we don't back down, if we keep protesting, if we keep making our voices heard, if we make sure our politicians in power know that this is what we demand, not just what we want, but what we demand, that we will get Medicare for all, and it will be because of Bernie Sanders, of course, but it will also be because of all of us. The American people need to stand up and demand what Europeans and other developed countries already have. And we don't need to listen to these propaganda groups, which I'll get into more. Bernie mentioned it in this opinion piece of his, that there are propaganda groups out there battling against Medicare for All and trying to trick people. As I said, it's total propaganda, trying to trick people into not supporting Medicare for All or into backing down. We must not back down at all. Medicare for All will happen. And here we go. Here in Newsweek, Bernie Sanders calls out anti-Medicare for All front group. Bernie Sanders singled out insurance and pharmaceutical industry front group Partnership for America's Healthcare Future in a new editorial for BuzzFeed, calling on supporters of Medicare for All legislation to refuse to back down. And we've already read this quote here. But Sanders cautions that, even with Medicare for All's overwhelming public support, a backlash from powerful special interests that will continue to reap hundreds of billions of dollars from the status quo will make passage of universal, single-payer healthcare a difficult fight. Sanders specifically calls out the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future, an alliance of private interests, including lobbyists from health insurance, private hospital, and pharmaceutical industry, formed in the summer of 2018. Slides from a PAHCF presentation leaked to The Intercept outlined two primary objectives for the alliance: change the national conversation around single-payer / Medicare for All, and minimize the potential for this option in healthcare from becoming part of a national political party's platform in 2020. To pursue their goal of thwarting Medicare for All, which not only enjoys broad popular support, but also shares 122 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives and Senate. Now, imagine that. Remember, Bernie said 10 years ago he couldn't get a single senator to support Medicare for All. Now there's 122 two in Congress who have co-sponsored, supported Medicare for All. That is huge. It's enormous. The Partnership for America's Healthcare Future has lobbied members of Congress and engaged in an ad-buying blitz, including thousands of anti-Medicare for All Facebook and Twitter ads, typically hyper-targeted at Democratic co-sponsors of Medicare for All legislation. Members of the partnership spent a combined $143 million in 2018, including $23 million in lobbying money from insurance giant Blue Cross Blue Shield and nearly $28 million from pharmaceutical industry trade group Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, according to data from the Center for Responsive Politics. Big pharma, health insurers, and for-profit hospitals are now using our healthcare premiums to publicly attack legislators who defend our right to healthcare. Benjamin Day, director of the pro-single-payer organization Healthcare Now, told Truth Out in an article cited by Sanders. More can and should be done to extend coverage and control costs, but with roughly 90% of Americans now covered and a majority satisfied with their coverage and care, we should be working together to build and improve on what's working, not tear it down as Senator Sanders would do. Remember, that's propaganda. PAHCF Executive Director Lauren Crawford Shaver, who coordinates grassroots efforts, in quotes, for lobbying firm Forbes Tate Partners. Ads paid for by the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future have argued that anything from full Medicare for All legislation to expanding the ACA with a public option will lead to higher taxes and less patient choice for every American family. By disrupting the current system and preventing public programs like state-by-state Medicaid expansions and federal subsidies to private insurance from bringing down costs. Sanders characterized PAHCF ads as deceptive, and they absolutely are. Remember, this is propaganda. Currently drafted Medicare for All legislation would dramatically expand patient choice by eliminating private insurance networks. Medicare for All legislation would also eliminate copays and deductibles, further empowering the 1 in 4 Americans who have refused medical care because of high costs, often even with insurance. As for higher taxes, economist Matt Bruenig argues in the New York Times that, even with the additional tax burden, most income groups will pay less from their wages than they currently do in private insurance premiums. A RAND study on single-payer legislation under consideration in New York State found that health care costs would be dramatically lower for low and middle-income people, with only individuals earning above $134,000 or $276,000 for a family of 4 paying more than they do now. It's so important that you'll be able to pick out the propaganda. You're going to see these ads. You're going to hear these things in the news that are presented as independent news articles, but in fact they're propaganda paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, planted by the pharmaceutical and private medical industries. And as Bernie said, you have to be aware of it and you have to stand up and fight against it. We cannot allow these propaganda groups to take over, to sway public opinion, to make people think they'll be paying more, because they will not be paying more. As you can see, they'll be paying far, far less. So there you have it, the opinion from Bernie Sanders and Kirsten Gillibrand as well. Healthcare is a human right. All Americans deserve healthcare. We're way behind in this, a single-payer system, and there's no reason why we can't enact it. But there are powerful groups lobbying against this, putting out propaganda, taking out ads to push this propaganda. There are also people who pretend to support Medicare for All, but are really proposing something very different and these incremental changes. So you really have to be careful and look at who you're supporting, who actually supports fully Medicare for All. And Bernie Sanders does. And in my opinion, we can only accept a presidential candidate and eventually a president who supports and make sure that we get Medicare for All, that every single American is covered. Healthcare is absolutely a human right.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.